Welcome back, everybody. I'm Puzzlebox, and I have here with me David Ankylosaur, whichever you prefer to go by.
Yeah, I either one is great.
Yeah, so David and I both play a decent amount of Pauper Commander, as I'm sure you guys know, and we both also partake in other formats, other card games, things of that nature. So if you want to talk a bit about what you play outside of Pauper Commander, since that'll be relevant for this conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I actually took a little bit of a step back from EDH in general over the past couple months to focus mostly on 60 card popper. Um, that's that was my first true love in Magic. After I've drafted, I have a cube, I enjoy limited and stuff too, but 60 card popper was really where everything kind of clicked for me. So I was focusing on that for a big tournament at MagicCon Chicago for a while, and now that MagicCon is over, I'm slowly grinded my way back into PDH.
For sure. Yeah, I took a step back from EDH in general around the same time as you because I had Yu-Gi-Oh tournaments to go to, and I'm still in Yu-Gi-Oh mode a bit because I have to get ready for the national event, but that's not for a few
Yeah,
months. So for now, I'm stepping back into Pauper Commander for a bit. We've got the Sanctuary event coming up this weekend, which hopefully
yeah,
this video will be out this weekend.
yeah, for sure.
Um, so working my way back into that. But yeah, we decided we were just having a conversation a few days ago and started talking about um, healthy metas and what actually makes a meta healthy and deck diversity and things of that nature. And we were like, we should just record this conversation and go a bit more in depth. So that's
Yeah,
what we're here to do for you guys. So
yeah, for
I
sure.
suppose we could just start with talking about what actually makes a meta healthy and go from there.
Yeah. I believe this started because I had sort of conflated healthiness of a meta with diversity of a meta. And I think a lot of people do that. And then you pressed me on it a little bit. I took a step back and I was like, I don't know that the two are necessarily synonymous. And thinking about it a little bit more, I'm not sure that healthy is necessarily the right term to use to describe a meta in general. It's a little bit more of like an objective term that we use to describe a subjective preference for a style of format, and maybe that's amongst the players. I guess from like Wizards' perspective, a quote unquote healthy format maybe tends to be a more diverse one because the more people who feel like their deck is viable, the more people who are gonna like play the format. But I don't know. What do you think about that?
I didn't think of that point of like the company perspective before, but I think that's an interesting lens to look through, you know?
Mhm.
Like, is a meta healthy to Wizards if they're making the most money possible? Or if there are as many players or decks or what? I would assume it would be monetary gains, right? So, like, an
Yeah,
expensive format, but it could also be a cheaper format that more people are playing that ends up making them more money. So I think
yeah,
that's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. And like, I don't know. I'm not going to pretend that I understand all the behind the scenes ins and outs of like what goes into banning a card from a format, for instance. But I think from a business perspective, it may be a bad look for the game if you need, I don't know, $400 Jace the Mind Sculptors to compete in standard, or a playset of like $80 Jace Vryn Prodigies when that was in standard. Um, because when those decks were popular and there were only a few viable strategies, requiring all those expensive mythics felt like kind of a turnoff to a lot of players, I think. On the other hand, I'm sure they also sold a lot of packs for people trying to win the Jace lottery and open a huge mythic. So I don't know. It's
Yeah.
uh it's an interesting question. I think when Wizards tends to make bans out of things like the modern format, for instance, they often will cite format diversity as a thing that they're looking to achieve. And, keeping certain decks under, I don't know, 20% of the meta would be a huge amount for any deck
Right.
in their perspective. But like, does that mean from the company's perspective that the health they're looking for does trend towards having a whole bunch of decks and a bunch of strategies that are viable?
Um, I would assume it does to at least an extent, right? Like the one of the pressing factors for this conversation popping up and why it was even a thought for me in the first place is because right now Yu-Gi-Oh is experiencing a tier 0 format, they call it. So like 80% plus of the topping lists at basically every tournament for the last month has been the same deck and its slight variation that's technically considered a second deck, but they're the same deck. Um,
Sure.
and a lot of people have been really upset about it, and some people love it, some people hate it, and
Mhm.
it's really challenging for Konami to deal with because basically all of these cards that are in this really oppressive deck came out in like the last 3 sets or something. So
Okay.
they're not like just gonna drop the ban hammer on these $60+ cards because they're
Sure.
making them money and people are opening new packs.
Yeah.
So it brings up the question of like, is a tier 0 meta ever healthy, quote unquote? Is it possible? And for Yu Gi Oh! Specifically, we've actually seen a previous tier 0 format that actually a lot of players really enjoyed. It was
Mhm.
tier limit format for any Yu Gi Oh! Players out there. It's where a lot of meme screenshots come from for Yu Gi Oh! Because during tournament play, like you have like 7 abilities activating from the graveyard on effectively the stack at the same
Mhm.
time from both players, just back and forth all the time, all
Yeah.
game, both players' turns. So it's a really complicated format, and the person who understood the deck better tended to win a lot more because it was just so complicated. So a lot of
Mhm.
professional players really enjoyed that, and a lot of casual people hated it because the deck was
Sure.
really strong and they couldn't play it as well, and they just lose, or they just hate the deck in general, tier 0 format, yada yada.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there was, at least when I wasn't playing a lot of standard. I was mostly drafting because I was a poor grad student during this era. But I know people sort of feel like Callblade standard was a tier 0 kind of format for a while. And I also know people that feel like Callblade Standard was the pinnacle of competitive Magic. Like, it sounds a little bit similar to what's going on in Yu-Gi-Oh. Like, if you like playing control decks and really intricate, grindy control mirrors, that was like the peak. It doesn't get better than that. And it wasn't a particularly diverse time in Standard Magic. Like, Callblade was kind of far and away the best deck for a while, but there was still a little bit of brewing that could happen within the Callblade shell, like people looking for tech cards to beat the mirrors and adjusting their decks to get slight edges against what they assumed most people would, you know, if they went to a PTQ or whatever, they'd assume most people would be on this deck or a deck that was designed to try and smash it. And that would that would happen. And it also definitely favored strong play skill, the players who could plan out turns and turns in advance and make the best decisions over that long sort of drawn out grindy match. Those are the ones that tended to do well and come out on top. So that's sort of the I guess it's not recent anymore. It was like 12 years ago, but that's the Magic equivalent I can think of to that.
Yeah, and one thing that you pointed out there is kind of why this another reason this conversation came up is because personally, I think I prefer less diverse metas to an extent, because
Mhm.
of exactly what you mentioned, where I like the tech cards a lot. I like the spicy
Mhm.
2 card changes between a deck, where it's
Yeah,
like, why are you doing this? It's to deal with the one deck that my deck struggles with in the meta, things of that nature. Where
Mhm.
in a diverse meta, that's really hard to do. Which obviously we'll talk about diversity of Pauper Commander when
Mhm.
we get around to that. But yeah, like having very specific tech cards to deal with exactly Gretchen or things of that nature,
Mhm.
it's a lot harder to do whenever you can only realistically guarantee that maybe one person is playing Gretchen at an event, maybe two,
Mhm.
and the rest
Yeah,
are just, I got no clue. They can be a completely different archetype or color combination. Pyroblast is one that comes to mind for Pauper Commander. A lot of
yep,
people love it because it's a good card. Blue's good, but a lot of people struggle to make a slot for it because the format's just too diverse.
right. Um, to a lesser extent, something like Relic of Progenitus or a Nile Spellbomb in your deck, going to be great against some of the Flicker decks, but maybe someone will show up with Teshar, but who can say, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely a toss up with some of those more targeted cards, and like that's how card games work, right? Like the more specific a card is at targeting a strategy, the more powerful that card is in that matchup. But wow, does it suck in other matchups, right?
Yeah.
Like Tormod's Crypt is
Right.
great if everyone's playing Teshar, but if they're not, I mean,
Yeah,
it's rough if it doesn't have just natural synergy with your deck by being a zero cost artifact or something of that nature.
for sure. Yeah, definitely. Um, yeah, that's really interesting. And um, as far as preferring less diverse formats, I think I lean the opposite way. And um, part of it is just like personal preference. I'm not someone that can build one deck and stick with it and become like, the Gretchen player or the gut player or whatever. Like I know some people in the community are sort of known for, you're sort of known for playing Gretchen
Right.
as your primary deck. I need to mix it up. I gotta I gotta have that variety in my life. And I really appreciate one of the things about Pauper EDH and CPH in general is that there are a wide variety of viable archetypes, and people can bring whatever they most enjoy to a tournament and generally have a shot of doing well. And some of that is like it's a 100 card format. There's 4 players. There's a lot that can happen in a game of Magic, and um, things people can pull wins out of nowhere sometimes, either through a combo or through politics or because the combo players were holding up interaction for each other all game and they snuck through a win. Um, there's all kinds of things that can happen, but you know, I I've had some success with control in the format with Aaron Street Urchin, with combo when I was playing Gretchen, a more mid-rangey like Voltron style deck like Satyr Enchanter, and like I don't know. I'm not I'm not a great player by any stretch of the imagination, but I do test a lot before events and put in time to get a good feel for the decks that I'm planning on playing in a tournament. And I think PDH, because of its like the breadth of its meta, definitely rewards knowledge of the format and understanding what your opponents might have and what their game plan looks like and who you need to stop when or protect yourself against, player A, whoever. That's all very important to having success in the format. So I don't know. I guess my point is that I think it's great for me personally that PH is a more diverse place, and um, I like mixing things up, and I would be kind of bummed if the only decks anyone ever had success with were various flavors of a combo, even if combo is, traditionally the best archetype to be in a tournament setting.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, look no further to see the proof of our opinions on this topic than what we bring to events, right? Like, I think I've
Yes.
brought Gretchen to every event except for one where I brought Teshar because I wanted to have fun. And
Mhm.
obviously, I
Yeah.
still enjoy playing other decks. But when it comes
Yes.
down
Yes.
to it, I'm like, I'll just play Gretchen. Whereas, Anklesaur is over here. I know you've brought Satyr, Enchanter, Gretchen, and Aranis at least
Mhm.
to 3 events that I can think of. And you might have. Did you bring Malcolm to an event?
Uh, Spoiler, not yet.
Not yet. All right.
But that I don't know. That's I I usually stress, and you know it takes me a long time to finally settle on a deck for an event usually, but that's definitely one of my top picks for Sanctuary this weekend.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm always between Gretchen and one other deck, basically every time. And then
Mhm.
once again, the thing that I do like about Pauper Commander is that, like, yes, the format is pretty diverse in what you can actually play, but a lot of the decks that are really strong have
Mhm.
similar game plans. So I still feel
Yeah.
relatively comfortable like picking my tech cards specifically. So I'll just like pick the deck between my 2 options that I want to play really early, and then I'll just spend like 3 or 4 days just looking at what's been popular because honestly, popular opinion in open play definitely influences tournament play, and people love to bring their
Yes.
pet decks because that's like what our
Mhm.
format is, right? So like if everyone's
Yeah.
been playing Sir Conrad, I'll bring some kind of tech card if I can find any, or I'll just suck it up and go, I'm just gonna play good cards and pray that I'm the
Yeah.
best deck at the table. Um,
Yes. For sure. Yeah. Sir Conrad has been seeing. It's been having a moment in the meta. Bunch of people have been trying that one out again, revisiting it.
yeah, and it's interesting too with this format, like what's considered a tech card, and what's not. Like I think for a while, Echoing Truth was considered like a tech card, um,
Mm.
but nowadays I think it's almost like mandatory staple level. I think that card's
Yeah.
insane.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. Um, I'm trying to think of other cards like that. Like I'm closing in on like a year of playing the format, but still there was a lot of PDH that happened before I jumped into it. So um I'm
One
not
that's kind
always
of the
I'm not always
opposite.
familiar with like the older metas. Yeah.
Right. One that's kind of the opposite, I would say, is Relic, like you mentioned. Like, everyone
Mhm.
played Relic forever, because, like, Tatiova was the boss, right?
Yeah.
And,
Hmm.
Relic has been getting cut a lot, probably a lot more than it should, in the
Hmm.
last year, honestly, I'd say. Like, Relic is a good card, but, a lot of people are struggling to fit it into their deck because either they have graveyard synergy or they just feel like it's not necessary.
Yeah. And I wonder how much of that has to do with um sort of, I don't want to call them turbo decks necessarily, but decks that are extremely proactive and looking less to interact with their opponents and more to just go, do their thing, and hopefully get the W within the first like 5 turns of the game.
Yeah, I
Like
mean,
Relic
Tatyova
isn't
was a
a card
slower
that
controlling combo
yeah,
deck, so yeah.
yeah. So if you're looking to um if you're looking to pack your deck with things like Relic that are more reactive, can help you against somebody else comboing, but isn't furthering your own game plan. That's just kind of fallen out of favor in the past like 6 months, from my understanding.
hmm Yeah, it seems like it. And like, there's also techie choices that promote diversity in the format in general. Like, honestly, I would say choosing between Gretchen and Layweaver Loreweaver is like a tech option in your command zone that can give you like 20 extra slots in your deck if you're switching to Weavers from Gretchen because you can cut some of the untappers if you want, or like things of that
Mhm.
nature. Where I think like staying in the same color and picking a similar commander can both be a more techie option based on the meta as well as promote deck diversity, right? And things of
Sure.
that nature.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. It's it's been interesting the the various mono black decks that people have been playing around with. Like Conrad is sort of risen to the top of the heap, but Crypt Rats was something that people were working on for a while. I know Golem Patient Plotter was something that was getting kicked around for a little bit. Um, and what else? Larry is
Yep.
a like the more aggressive take on that, loyal subordinate. But um, yeah, just lots of like you were talking about before, lots of similar game plans. Uh, all monocolored decks, looking to often often full of like edict effects, like the flesh bags and things like that, but um, with a different commander, so a somewhat different, you know, Larry being a more aggressive game plan, Conrad looking to combo with like a Felden's Cane or whatever, things like that. Just little uh not necessarily combos, but like, you know, sideways movements that you can make in that
Yeah, and
space.
some of them are even like extremely similar in the 99 because they're like a rat colony deck, right? And they're like, all right, we
Sure.
have 33 rats and 33 lands, so you've got this
Yeah.
much space to work with, and changing your commander is like one of the most impactful things you can do to change those kind of decks, right? Because it's your eighth
Yeah.
card. Um,
Hmm.
and even could potentially add an extra color with things like Garna or
Yeah.
I'm
Carter.
struggling. Yeah, Carter. Uh,
Yeah.
things of that nature.
There's the new guy. Is it Lanius, the new Edict guy
Oh
from
yeah.
Fallout?
I don't know the
Yeah,
name.
I've
I
seen
don't know
people
anything
talking
about
about him as
Fallout,
well.
but yeah, I saw
Yeah.
someone play that recently. So
Hmm. Yeah. Um, it seems like an interesting take on the mass edict kind of control deck. Yeah.
yeah, and oh, Lagomos, right? Like for like
Yes. Mhm.
board wipe control, you can play like
Board wipe
Lagomos, or
control.
you could play Mayhem Devil.
Yeah.
Some of these like super hard control decks, and they have completely different win conditions, even though like a lot of the deck looks the same. You know, Lagomos is
Hmm.
probably playing a combo or something of that nature, and Mayhem Devil probably not so much.
Yeah.
It could,
Hmm.
like, it can use the same combo and actually win the game with Mayhem Devil as the outlet, but it's the difference of
Yeah.
like having the outlet versus having a tutor in the command zone or
Yeah.
things of that nature, like Scholar of the Ages versus Paragon Drake. Basically the same
Yeah.
deck. Um, it's just which combo piece do you want, and a lot of things like that.
Yeah. There's the Rakdos cat guy too, Mahadi.
Oh yeah, Mahadi. Yeah, I played against that at RIW.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, lots of lots of lots of decks within that space, and I don't know. I wonder if there's let me ask you. Do you think it would make more sense to group decks based on archetype rather than commander for certain things like this, like Rakdos midrange or Rakdos control versus Mahadi versus Mayhem Devil versus Lanius Legate?
I think that the answer varies, obviously, because commander. But
Yes, it is commander.
I think that it depends on like the scope that you're looking at the archetypes from, right? Like if you're
Mhm.
looking at the thing from like going back to roping this into the diversity conversation, if you're looking
Yeah.
at it from a perspective of like I like really diverse metas where there's lots of different options, I think you would want to look at it as grouped pairings because that shows like realistically how many options there are, right? Like sure
Mhm.
there's Gretchen and Weavers and River Hoopa, but those are
Yeah.
all the same deck. So
Yeah.
if I want to know how many like different options there are, I'd want to group those up. Whereas
Mhm.
if I know that I like this deck and I want to know about like how much do I have leniency for tech options and things of that nature, then I would want to super fixate on all right, how many Simic freed from the real decks are there? Um,
Yes.
how many Rakdos Mogwarts decks are there? Things of
Mhm.
that nature. So I think it kind of depends on what you're looking for in the format, and funnily enough, I think the format kind of provides both.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Um, it's yeah. I just thought that maybe because just thinking about the way that deck names even used to be in 60 card formats, there used to be like funny combo decks would have like funny serial names or whatever, but now they get grouped into this deck is Bant Control, this deck is Rakdos Midrange, this deck is, color pair descriptor of its game plan. And like whether or not that's a thing that PDH should adopt, the rather than calling Gretchen a separate deck and Weaver's a separate deck, or if we should just call them Simic Freed and bring them all together. Just an interesting thought as far as looking at the actual diversity of the meta, as you were saying.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, like, on cph.guide, we already separate them on mid range, aggro, control, combo, and Voltron.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really interesting because somehow the community has so many different ideas of the most notorious one, what mid range is in our format,
Yeah,
right? But like
right.
even combo, people are like, is it a combo deck if it has a combo in it? Is it a combo deck if combo's the main thing? Is
Mm-hmm.
it a combo if combo's like the secondary win condition that I just sneak in there if I can't get through combat? Or like, there's so many weird,
Yeah,
like, is Dargo Caddis Voltron or aggro? I'm never
exactly.
like souping up Dargo. I'm just punching people with my commander. Is that Voltron? Um,
Yeah,
so like it
like
gets
what is
so
Vizkopa
hard.
Guild Mage?
Yeah, like
I'm a Vizkopa Guild Mage enjoyer. What is it? Is it combo? Is it mid range? It has some control elements sometimes, depending on the build.
yeah, it's like a
Um,
non-deterministic combo deck, kind of.
exactly. Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
we don't typically consider those combo decks in multiplayer
Same with
formats,
Zada.
but like
Same with Zada. Zada being a control or not a control, a combo aggro deck sometimes,
yeah,
where it's not really a combo, but you're still having a pseudo storm turn, and that can feel like a combo more than just like go, go into punchies.
Yeah, and like I think mid-range has a feel to it in our format, but I think it's still very difficult to define, and a lot of times if people don't know what a deck is because it's not fast,
Mhm.
but it's not trying to control the board, they'll just go, it's mid-range. Um,
Yeah,
which like it's a questionable deck decision all in itself, yada yada. That's a completely different conversation about mid-range. But
sure.
yeah, it's like how do you even go about talking about if the diversity is healthy if we don't know how to define the diversity in the first place and we don't know how to
Right.
define healthy? Um,
Yeah. Yeah. It does become much more of a linguistic argument than it is anything else at that point. I was thinking, as we had mentioned, Sanctuary coming up, the previous Sanctuary tournament had 20 different commanders. But among those, there were like three different Malcolm Red decks. There were a variety of Abdel decks. I think there were three Abdel decks too, but like two of them were blue and
one was like
one of
red,
them
I think.
was, yeah, there may have been an Abdel Black in there as
Oh
well.
yeah, Abdel
And
Black is more likely. Yeah.
yeah. Um, and like that that cuts against the diversity argument a bit, but still like there is a sizable difference between Malcolm Breaches and Malcolm Kedis and what they're trying to do.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, so
Yeah.
yeah.
All of this to say, you can tell people that the format is really diverse. Um, but that doesn't mean you're telling them it's healthy. As a matter of fact, they might think it's the opposite. I think very few people uh don't like diversity to like an extreme to the point where they're like, I only enjoy tier zero formats, right?
Mhm.
I think
Yeah.
that's a very strong push. I enjoy a good bit of diversity. I still like having my fun decks on the side. I love Chakram Slinger, Chakram Retriever. Deck is garbage, but it's fun to like play every now and then, you know?
Yeah, for
Um,
sure.
and yeah, it's
Yeah.
like just you got to find out where you get your enjoyment, like what form of diversity. Is it in the 99 diversity? Is it
Mhm.
deck diversity overall? Really honing in on what part of the game and its diversity do you really enjoy? Um,
Yeah. Yeah. And something I wanted to mention as like the format that has like anti-diversity is Dandan. And Dandan, keeps having it had a moment a while ago and it keeps like popping up. Dandans are still like kind of expensive now. The blackboarded Dandans are still like $4. Um, but yeah, that's a format that is basically built around having a control mirror and having not just you share the same deck in the Dandan format if you're not familiar with it, but it's all like mono blue control. You're trying to kill each other with 4/1 fish. Um, so much of it is a memory game too. Like who has the only counter spells in a traditional Dandan deck are memory lapse. So you can put cards on top of the deck for you to draw later. Sometimes your opponent will have a cycling card to like try and steal back a card that you've memory lapsed. Lots of like super intricate grindy gameplay. Um, Halimar Depths gets involved, so you're also trying to remember like, oh, I know the top three cards, and I'm trying to set up turns in advance for how I'm going to play that. But yeah, there's no diversity in Dandan. It's solely a format that exists so people who enjoy playing control can play control against each other. And personally, I love that. But if Magic were all Dan, I might feel differently about it.
yeah, and I think it like that specifically brings out an interesting other point about diversity. And like I enjoy a good game of Dan Dan,
Mhm.
but like you said, would I want Magic to be Dan Dan? No. Um,
Yeah.
So like, even if you enjoy those less diverse things, I do think that one thing that is quote unquote objective about health of a meta is I think that if the format is the same thing for too long, then it's unhealthy. I don't think less diverse meta is necessarily unhealthy on its own. But when it's drawn out over the course of time, people will drop out of it, and you're not going to get as many new people in because they're going to be like, oh, it's still Dan Dan. Um,
Yeah.
so that's an interesting point there. Length of
Yeah.
the diversity. I don't even have the words to describe what I'm trying to say, but you get the idea.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think it depends on what the tier 0 deck is as well. Like for instance, 60 card Pauper had a problem with Chatterstorm a while ago.
I
When
was there
Chatterstorm
for
came
that.
out, oh my god. Chatterstorm was like the tier 0 deck. It was very, very difficult to beat. It could go off very early in the game and um, very hard to disrupt for, you know, other than main decking like 4 duresses to try and hit the combo pieces, but they would just duress you first. That's just how the Chatterstorm decks worked. Um, that was a deck that you sort of needed to play if you were going to have success in Pauper. And I think a lot of people found it miserable because it was sort of an oppressive combo deck, which I think, is definitely different from something like Callblade Standard, where the deck that was at the top of the meta, sort of the tier 0 deck, was control. Like you could at least feel like you were playing a game of Magic, and playing against somebody who was really good at Callblade, they would, more often than not come out on top. But it wasn't something like, turn 2 Galvanic Relay for 12, turn 3 kill you with squirrels every game, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that that's an important point for diversity as well. Like, not only does it not have to, or not only should it not be the same deck for a very long time, it also shouldn't be certain kinds of decks, maybe, um, because it'll turn off a wide variety of players. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I get the point. And like that's the thing about 4-player formats and Pauper Commander is that for a deck to truly be like oppressive, it has to be so far above every other deck in terms of its power level. Because if, I don't know, let's say Sir Conrad is the best deck in the format,
Mhm.
undisputably, but it's not like so far above everything else to the point where there's 3 other players and
Mhm.
it benefits them to take you out of the game if you have the highest just like odds of winning, period,
Right.
because that's you dying means they only have 2 opponents to work with, and like just the nature of multiplayer means that you can't like just blitz out wins all the time because you have
Yeah.
3 people staring you down, especially if it is a tier 0 format or things of that nature.
Yeah. The closest thing that I've ever played against to something that felt like a tier 0 deck actually isn't legal, but it was Abdel Candlekeep Sage.
Yeah, no, it's insane.
Yeah, that deck is in the tournaments where that deck is legal that allow common backgrounds, and there are a couple. Riches to Rags usually does that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's far and away one of the best things you can be doing. Just there's so much card advantage. Um, either the turn or the turn after you stick Abdel, you basically win. You draw a ton of cards and have all the pieces that you need, and you just go off, and it's very, very consistent that way.
Yeah, and I think notably, I've played a lot of games against that deck where it doesn't win, precisely because everyone knows how it works. Everyone knows it's insane, and everyone's gonna be holding a counterspell to make sure Abdel doesn't resolve. And
Yes.
like they're like, I don't care about the second best deck at the table. This is not happening because I will lose to this. And
Yes.
yeah, it's just the interesting parts of politics, spite plays as you have it. It's just the nature of the beast with multiplayer, and you can only do so much to deal with it, you know?
Hmm. Absolutely.
But yeah, I think that pretty much wraps up my thoughts. Do you have any other topics you want to discuss before we close it up?
No, I think we got through everything that I wanted to talk about.
All right. Thank you for coming on today, David. It was great to talk to you for 40 minutes about anything and everything.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
gotta
Thanks
have
for
you.
having me.
Yeah, gotta talk to you more. Thank you guys for watching. Be sure to leave a like down below. Comment, let us know your thoughts. Do you love, hate deck diversity, tier 0 formats? I don't know.
Yeah.
Anything of that nature. Subscribe if you haven't while you're down there, and you all have a good night.